My parents always said family was everything, until they made my brother the star and me the bank for his mistakes. Dan's in deep, and now they expect me to save him. But what I did next changed everything. Hi, my name is Alex. I'm 28. And yes, my parents were the type who always had a favorite. Spoiler, it wasn't me. It's like they played find the odd one out every day. And guess who was the odd one? Right, me. I look at my phone screen. 5 missed calls from my mom in the last hour. Classic. A painfully familiar scenario. I already knew why she was calling. Golden boy. Dan was in trouble again. Same old story. What's new? For a moment, I really wanted to throw my phone at the wall. But then I thought, dude, that's way too dramatic even for me. So I just turned it off instead. Let it sit in silence. Because honestly, I knew what they wanted from me. Just to drag Dan out of the latest mess he happily jumped into with both feet. When I was younger, I had big dreams. Not just like, I'm going to buy a cool car, but real plans. I wanted to go to art school, create, be free. You know, typical dream for any normal teenager looking to escape the family hellhole. But nope. If you think my parents would leave me alone when Dan was around, you're sorely mistaken. See, Dan was the one. He always got the best of everything, and me? I got the scraps. By the time I turned 17, I started realizing that my dreams were apparently just a joke to my parents. I told them I wanted to go to art school. Their reaction? Art? That's not a real job, Alex. It's a hobby, you know. You need something real in life, like Dan. And just like that, I was sent to the back burner. Dan needed to go to business school, and of course, my dreams didn't matter. All the focus was on him. Oh, and to make it more fun, I was expected to work and help pay for his education. Me? I was juggling 3 part-time jobs because, as they explained, it's for the family, Alex. Sure, the classic we're family card. My future? It just didn't exist. Because in a family where there's a Dan, there are no other stars. By the time I hit 19, my brother Dan was already off at college, living it up like he was royalty. And guess who was helping keep that cushy lifestyle afloat? That's right, me, mighty Alex, working endless shifts while Dan partied his way through what was supposed to be his higher education. My parents, of course, thought nothing of it. They just nodded along, blissfully unaware, or maybe just willfully ignoring the fact that I was practically breaking my back so Dan could spend his days chilling in some dorm room or hanging out with his friends at the local bar. And then, when I expressed any interest in going to school myself, my parents pulled the same tired excuse. Alex, art is a luxury. A luxury? Seriously? Since when did having dreams and ambitions become some kind of indulgence? But apparently, in their world, unless you were on the fast track to becoming an accountant, or, heaven forbid, a lawyer, then anything else was just a frivolous waste of time. It didn't matter that I had been sketching and painting since I could hold a pencil, or that art was the only thing that made me feel alive. No, no, no. In their eyes, if I wasn't headed toward a practical career, then it wasn't worth pursuing. And here's the kicker. They had a neat little justification for why Dan's education was top priority, while mine was tossed aside like some irrelevant hobby. Dan's education is an investment, they said, like that explained everything. An investment. I mean, sure, if by investment they meant all their money was going straight into club fees, parties, and whatever bar tabs Dan was racking up while he was finding himself. Funny how finding himself seemed to mostly involve shots, loud music, and blackout hangovers, while I was out here scrubbing gas station counters and stacking boxes like my life depended on it. But it didn't matter. My parents were over the moon about Dan's progress. They couldn't stop talking about how well he was doing, how he was really getting the full college experience. Yeah, you could say that again. Full experience, all right, if you counted going to frat parties and ditching classes as personal growth. Every time I tried to bring up my own dreams of going to art school, they hit me with the same line. Alex, your brother is counting on you. Seriously? Did anyone even bother to ask what I was counting on? Or was that too much to ask? No, because clearly, in our family, the only person who mattered was Dan. He was the golden child, the one whose future was worth pouring everything into, while I was just there. My job, apparently, was to put my dreams on hold indefinitely, so Dan could find himself in the bottom of a beer glass. And oh, the emotional guilt trips. If they handed out awards for emotional manipulation, my parents would have had a trophy case full of them. They had this way of making it sound like if I didn't keep working myself to the bone to help Dan, then I was somehow betraying the family. Family has to help each other, they'd say, as if that justified everything. Yeah, but funny how helping each other always seemed to mean me sacrificing my future, while Dan swam in parental money, and apparently all the cash I could scrape together. It wasn't like I didn't love my family, but come on. How much more was I supposed to give up for a brother who couldn't even be bothered to take his own life seriously? Every time I brought up art school, it was like talking to a wall. They'd nod along, but you could tell they weren't really listening. They didn't hear me, not really. To them, I was just another cog in the machine of Dan's success story. And honestly, it was getting harder and harder to pretend that I was okay with that. A few more years slipped by, and you can probably guess what happened next. Dan barely made it out of business school. And when I say barely, I mean it was like watching someone crawl out of quicksand. His diploma? It might as well have been a raffle prize for all the effort he put in. And after all that, what came next? A job in his field? Ha! As if. That would require some level of effort or ambition, neither of which Dan was known for. So, surprise, surprise. No job in sight, no career prospects on the horizon, just Dan, sitting pretty in the comfort of his post-graduation haze. But don't worry, folks, because in this family, failure is never punished. It's rewarded. My parents, the eternal enablers, swooped in like the financial superheroes they believed themselves to be. With no hesitation, they took out more loans. Yes, more loans, because apparently the mountain of debt wasn't high enough yet. We've got to help him get on his feet, they said, as if Dan was some helpless newborn deer, wobbling around without a clue. Never mind that he had 2 perfectly good feet of his own. Why bother standing when you've got Mom, Dad, and Alex as your personal support team? And me? I was still stuck in the same rut. One dead-end job after another, splitting my time between slinging boxes in a warehouse and serving burnt coffee in a cafe that could hardly keep its lights on. Meanwhile, Dan kept up his usual routine, spouting off his grand visions for the future like he was some kind of self-made genius. Every conversation was a TED Talk waiting to happen, except the audience was just me, rolling my eyes as he talked about his big plans. And then things took a turn for the worse. Much worse. Dan, in his infinite wisdom, decided it was time to start his own business. Now you'd think, after years of watching him barely scrape by, maybe he'd have a solid idea, right? Maybe he learned something in those business classes. Nope. Wrong again. The business he decided to start? A pyramid scheme. Of course, he didn't call it that. Oh no, never in front of Dan. He insisted it was a multi-level marketing opportunity. And I mean insisted. If you so much as hinted that it was anything less than the entrepreneurial breakthrough of the century, he'd launch into a full-blown rant about leveraging networks and building passive income. It got to the point where I felt like I was living in some kind of corporate motivational nightmare. If I had $1 for every time Dan used the word opportunity, I'd have been rich enough to buy my way out of this endless cycle of family drama. Instead, I was left watching helplessly as Dan dove headfirst into a financial abyss. He racked up debt at a speed that was honestly impressive. Like, if there were an Olympic event for accumulating debt, Dan would have taken gold. And where were my parents in all of this? Right there, cheering him on, offering their unconditional support as if Dan was on the verge of discovering the next big thing. You would have thought Dan was some sort of financial prodigy, the way they clapped along to his every move. They backed him at every turn, throwing more money into the black hole of his so-called business. To them, it was just another step in his journey to greatness. To me, it was like watching a slow-motion car crash, except instead of stepping in to help, they were handing him more gas to throw on the fire. And where did that leave me? Stuck on the sidelines, watching the whole circus unfold. I couldn't decide what was worse, the sheer absurdity of it all, or the fact that I was still somehow expected to pick up the slack. I spent my days silently grinding away at my jobs, and my nights listening to Dan's latest business updates with all the patience I could muster. Part of me wanted to drag them all to a financial literacy course, sit them down, and force them to face reality. The other part of me just wanted to disappear, to escape from the endless cycle of bad decisions and misplaced optimism. But instead, I just kept quiet, burying my frustration as I watched Dan continue to drown in his own debt, faster than anyone could have predicted. It was like watching a bad sitcom on repeat, where the punchline never changes and the laugh track plays over and over again. And me? I was just the unwilling audience, stuck in the middle of a family drama I never asked for, torn between stepping in and saving them from themselves, or just hiding until the storm passed. By the time I hit 26, I did the unthinkable. I managed to save enough money to escape the circus that had been my life. I rented a small studio apartment. It wasn't glamorous, not by any stretch of the imagination. No sweeping city views, no designer furniture, just 4 walls, a bed, and enough space to finally breathe. But you know what? It was mine. I wasn't sharing it with anyone, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't tethered to the endless demands of my parents or the drain that was Dan's existence. This little shoebox was my castle, and I cherished every square inch of it. I also landed a job at an advertising agency. Now, let's be honest. Nobody grows up dreaming of working in advertising. When I was a kid, I didn't sit there thinking, someday, I want to make catchy slogans for toothpaste commercials. But life's not always about living out your childhood fantasies, right? And in a way, it was close enough to what I'd always wanted. Creativity was part of the gig, even if it was the kind of creativity where you had to make mouthwash sound like the most exciting thing ever invented. Still, it was a win, a small victory in my personal war for independence. For the first time in forever, life started to feel like it was getting on track. You know that feeling when you wake up in the morning and the air feels lighter? When you realize no one's hovering over you, waiting to pounce with questions like, when will you get a real job? Or, why can't you be more like Dan? Those voices that used to fill my head had finally gone quiet. And the silence? Oh, it was bliss. The freedom was intoxicating. I could actually taste what life was supposed to be like. No guilt trips, no lectures, no weight of family expectations pressing down on me like a boulder. And the first real move I made with that freedom, I cut ties with my parents. Completely. After years of them pulling the emotional manipulation card like it was their favorite hobby, I had reached my limit. They had used guilt as their weapon of choice for as long as I could remember, pressing that button every time they needed me to step in and save the day, mostly for Dan's sake. It wasn't healthy, and I knew that if I didn't sever the connection, I'd never truly be free. So I did it. I shut them out to protect what was left of my sanity. For a while, everything was peaceful. No phone calls, no surprise guilt trips, no desperate pleas for help. I almost started to believe I was free for good. But of course, peace in my family never lasts. Last week, it all came crashing down. It started with a phone call from my mom. I stared at the screen, watched it ring, and ignored it. I could feel that familiar knot forming in my stomach. Then, not long after, my dad called. That's when I knew. Something was up. It wasn't just a casual check-in. No, this was a signal. The alarm bells were ringing in my head, and before I even touched the phone, I already knew the script. Dan's in trouble. I didn't need to pick up to hear what was coming next. I could almost hear their voices through the screen. The same voices that had gone silent for months, suddenly roaring back to life the moment things took a turn for the worse. And of course, they weren't calling for a catch-up chat or to ask how I was doing. No. They were calling because Dan, the perpetual disaster, had somehow landed himself in another financial catastrophe. And they needed me, the ever-reliable, ever-expendable Alex, to come to the rescue. The irony was thick enough to choke on. They hadn't said a word to me in months, not since I'd cut ties and built a life of my own. But the moment Dan's house of cards came tumbling down again, I was suddenly back on their radar. Like clockwork, their odd son, the one who had always been brushed aside, was now their best hope for solving the crisis. Did they really think I was naive enough to jump back into their mess? That I'd rush in, cape flying, to save Dan from yet another one of his self-made disasters? Not this time. I wasn't going to let them drag me back into that whirlpool of problems. I had finally broken free, and there was no way I was getting sucked back into the chaos. I had learned my lesson. They could handle Dan's mess themselves, or not. It wasn't my problem anymore. I'd spent too long carrying the weight of their expectations, sacrificing my own dreams and well-being to keep their fragile little world intact. But now I was done. Let them figure it out. Because this time, I was choosing me. Eventually, I couldn't resist and called back. As much as I wanted to stay out of their circus, curiosity got the better of me. Mom answered almost immediately, as if she had been sitting by the phone, waiting. "Alex, your brother needs help," she said in a voice full of desperation. I could almost see her face, dramatic, like in a bad soap opera. "He'll lose everything if we don't help." And that's when I couldn't hold back. I just laughed, nearly choking. Out loud. Real, straight into the phone laughter. "Lose everything? He's never had anything except your endless promises. You made sure I lost all my dreams, remember?" And then there was silence. The kind where you know you've hit a nerve, but they have no comeback. Then I heard my dad's heavy sigh on the line. Of course, now it was his turn to try and fix things. "You're still family, Alex. Family should help each other." Oh yes, that old tune playing on repeat. I took a deep breath to keep from saying everything that was on my mind. "Family helps each other, huh? You mean like how you helped me when I wanted to go to art school? Or when I worked 3 jobs to pay off your golden boy's debts, and now you want me to step in and clean up this mess again?" The pause on their end was louder than any words. And you know what I did? I simply said, "No, not this time," and hung up the phone. Now that was real freedom. The next day, feeling triumphant after yesterday's victory, I had no idea they'd show up at my door. But of course, classic parental ambush. They came to my place like it was some kind of emergency rescue mission. I'm standing there, minding my own business. I open the door, and immediately, without any greetings, without explanations, Mom, with a twisted face, starts the show. "Alex, you're selfish!" she yells, not even stepping inside. "Oh, hi to you too," I wanted to say, but kept quiet. "Dan needs your help." I stood there with my arms crossed, watching them act out their drama. Oh yes, my parents pulled out all their signature lines. "We raised you. We sacrificed for you." Classic stuff. They must have rehearsed this speech the whole way over here. I just couldn't take it and burst out laughing. You know, that nervous, sarcastic laughter when you've had enough. "You sacrificed for me?" I asked, clearly savoring the moment. "You made me sacrifice my life for Dan. Supported him while he ruined his life, and now you want me to come in and fix everything? No, guys, enough." My dad quickly tried to chime in with some wise words, but I didn't give him a chance. "You know what, Dad? I'm not going to be your backup plan anymore. Let Dan solve his own problems. I didn't sign up to be his eternal safety net." To say they were shocked is an understatement. The next day, they came again. As if the previous day's performance wasn't enough, they decided to stage Act 2 in my personal theater of absurdity. Classic parental ambush. No warnings, no "may we come in?" Just showed up, opened the door, and immediately started their favorite game of emotional blackmail. We argued for nearly an hour. Yes, a full hour of them trying to drag me back into their drama, and I resisted with everything I had. First, my mom started yelling again, calling me selfish, saying I was letting them down, that Dan really needs my help. Then my dad joined in on the endless tirade, telling me how they always did their best for me. Honestly, it was also scripted. I was on the verge of just walking into the other room and leaving them to scream at the walls. But eventually, they left. After an hour of shouting and accusations, after a whole show of sobbing and dramatic sighs, they finally closed the door behind them. And you know what? I didn't feel relieved. Not right away, at least. Sure, they were gone, but the guilt still hung over me like a dirty coat. After all, they'd nurtured that guilt in me for years. Since childhood, I was conditioned to be the one they could dump all their problems on. I sat on the couch, staring at the dusty sketchbook I hadn't opened in months. And then it hit me. Slowly, like every nerve in my brain was starting to wake up again. This guilt? It's not mine. Dan is no longer my problem. I don't have to be his lifeline. My parents? They're no longer my responsibility either. That's it. Enough. And for the first time in my life, I realized it's time to choose myself. Seriously, I used to think that was selfish, to put yourself first. But it turns out it's not just okay. It's absolutely necessary. The calls, of course, didn't stop right away. Mom called like it was her new job, to harass me. Dad tried to catch me a couple of times too. But you know what? I ignored it all. A simple swipe of my finger, and silence. It's amazing how technology lets you avoid all those dramatic conversations they love so much. Meanwhile, Dan kept rolling downhill like a snowball no one could stop. His debts piled up faster than you could imagine, as if he was trying to break a world record. Lost his apartment? Of course, what did you expect? That was as predictable as day and night. Now he's living with my parents again, just like always. What else can you do when you've run out of opportunities from multi-level marketing, only to realize nothing works? And me? I'm finally starting to live. And when I say live, I mean really live. I'm working on a new project that finally lets me be creative, not just grind through the routine. It's not just a job, it's a chance to express myself. And you know what? I even signed up for art classes. Yeah, maybe a bit late? Perhaps. But better late than never, as they say. And my family? Let them sort things out with Dan. He's old enough to face his mistakes. I'm no longer interested in his problems. I'm not their backup plan to be called in like an emergency response team. Now I'm living my life, and you know what? It feels damn good.